This week in Arsenal, Mario Kojer-Dubry is set to depart. Cheeto Obi Mikel considers his options. Ethan Waneri looks like an outside first-team option, and Villa sets a concerning precedent for the youth market. Let's get into it.
Maybe we'll have a good surprise for you.
Welcome in to This Week in Arsenal, episode 62. It is June 27th, 2024. I'm Sham, also known as Job Bellingsham. I know I've done the Jude Bellingsham one before, so we're switching it up. But welcome in. The last time we spoke, I was not the same age as a Premier League manager, but now I am. And as ever, I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Sash, who you can follow on Twitter at LTArsenal. How you doing, Sash?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, apart from the extremely humid weather over here, but looking to cool off in the next hour by discussing Arsenal youth. I'm in fact living in the place where the head of the youth academy comes from, in Hanover. That's where Per Mertesacker is from. So yeah, looking forward to speaking all things Arsenal youth today. How are you, Sham?
I'm good. I'm also dealing with some humidity. I think it hit I was driving back from work yesterday. My car said it was 95 degrees out, which is concerning considering the summer just started. But welcome in everyone who's coming in. In addition to our handles, you can follow the pod on Twitter at This Week Arsenal. If you're watching on YouTube, please do comment, like, subscribe, hit the bell, and all that good stuff. So we are joined today by an illustrious guest. We are going to be talking about teenagers with a Canadian, but no, our guest is not Drake. It is the one, the only. I had to. It was right there. It was right there. It was the one, the only George V. AFC. George, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm brilliant, mate. How could you not be up for an intro like that? No, thank you. You're very, very kind. No, I'm excited to do this stuff. Obviously, I get a little bit of a moniker for enjoying talking about youth football, but it's definitely something a little bit of a passion project of mine. And I think there's a lot of changes, so it's a really good topical area of point of interest to get into, especially as the transfer window seems to be pretty quiet based on all the international tournaments and Arsenal no longer leaking any information. Mikel has shot down every potential leakage. So we are grasping for straws about trying to find a plan, but ultimately the youth, I think, offers a really interesting transition, and there's a lot to talk about there. So I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, I think you've said this before, where the academies and the youth teams are kind of that final frontier in terms of, kind of getting the upper hand in terms of efficiency and leveraging just advantages over other clubs. So, I really do think that is kind of an area of the game that's getting more and more attention, rightly so. Because, if you're trying to control every aspect of the game to get better and better as a club, why not start at the beginning with some of your talents and kind of, increase the quality of player that's coming through and work on that. And, we've seen many clubs do that to great effect. So why not join those ranks? But it's really great to have you on. And I just kind of want to jump into it with probably the most pressing matter in terms of academy football at Arsenal, which is Mario Kojer-Dubry's impending departure, right? That's been reported on by a couple of outlets at this point. It seems all but sorted. We don't know where he's going at this point in time, but I know he was linked with Newcastle and Dortmund and, I think a couple of their destinations abroad. So the prevailing reactions to this seem to have kind of, either been one of two things. Either, you have some people on one side saying it's not a big deal. Talents leave all the time for free, right? Why is everyone freaking out about this one? We don't know whether or not he was going to be good. And then on the other side, you kind of have people who are really, really upset about this and kind of treating Kozer Dubry like a member of the first team has left, right? As I think a lot of people might have had really high expectations in terms of what his involvement with the senior squad was going to be. So, where in that spectrum do you fall? And kind of, overall, how concerned are you by Kozer Dubry's departure?
There's a lot to touch on here because I don't think it's a simple question, and it's probably a spectrum about where you're going to be really angry about this, right? Now, there's a couple topics to talk on, and I'm sure we'll get into detail on some of them. I mean, there's the whole PSR climate, the idea that the Premier League going after multiple leagues and teams, really, and enforcing rules that have been around for a while but are recently highlighted means that academy sales provide a massive accounting benefit. So it's no longer even just a marginal gain, like how you brilliantly put it in the prelude. It's actually a significant gain. It's just a significant impact on a team's ability to be free in the market. And so when you lose on 5, 10, 15 million pound deals, by the way, for talent that haven't played one appearance in the Premier League, it's massive to Arsenal's ability to get business done, for the preferred targets that they want, and to be in kind of a healthy financial position to do so. So that's one aspect of it. And then there's another aspect of it when you start to look at talent in general, because it's not just Mario Kozier-Dubéry leaving, it's Arthur Okonkwo, who we've lost now for a free as well, who has had no value after having been League Two goalkeeper of the year and had a brilliant loan in Sturm Graz the year before. So it's not like we're talking about an asset that didn't have value. You're losing Ruel Walters, another one that was really propped up by Arsenal and found in first team sessions previously. In fact, is rumored to be going to Rangers. And when you settle on a Mario Kozier-Dubéry, to provide the context, the year before this one, he had 14 goal and assists and 17 starts in the Premier League 2 campaign. As far as an attacking player goes, what message are you sending even if you're performing at that level? Not only can you not secure first team minutes as a cameo, but you also can't secure a loan at the end of that season. And then when you are told to re-sign and you're asked to be re-signed, you're not given a loan at all in September after that season. You're not given a loan in January as well. And you're seeing your teammates in terms of Zaymon Louis, Mauro Bandera, and Cam Edwards, who have performed less than you after being the MVP of the season before, go on loan. So from a youth perspective, you've now lost 3 people on freeze. You've had Lino Sousa that's left towards Aston Villa for development, going on Plymouth on loan as well. So it's not just a Mario that's leaving. And by the way, I might add, Mika Bireth, who has done brilliantly on loan, is now in the last year of his contract. Will you be getting value in that instance? Probably not. Charlie Patino, another hot name that many Arsenal people have known for many years, by the way, has been loaned inefficiently and is now going into his last year of the contract. So now you've got 3 players of significant value that have left on freeze. Carl Hein, we've managed to re-sign, so that's good. But then our 2 brightest loan youth right now, in Mika Bireth and Charlie Patino, have 1 year left on their contract, so you're not going to be getting value. So regardless of the talent debate here, there's a clear exodus of talent that has happened in the last, I'd say, 6 to 8 months. And I'll end on one last pillar of this conversation, and that is, what have Arsenal decided to do about this issue? There's been a clear out in terms of AU scouts, in terms of our approach to recruitment. We have now changed our recruitment strategy to want to highlight and compete for some of the biggest talents domestically. You've seen that with recruitment of Braden Clark. You've seen that with rumored interest in Ryan Mikito from Chelsea. So there's a very big shift in our type of recruitment. And then not just that, there's also been a shift in personnel. I don't know if people know, but we've got a new loan manager in-house, and Phil Cohen, that was recently got in from, I believe, October was when we first poached him from Rangers, and he's been on gardening leave until starting in January, which is when we ironically saw the Keon Edwards, Mauro Bandera, and Zaymon Louis loans that were late, that we wanted in September, but finally happened in January. And so there's a lot there that I've talked about, but I'd say the 3 pillars are: PSR climate means that regardless of where you stand, whether you felt Mario Kozier-Dubéry would be a big impact on the squad, Him leaving for free was huge value that Arsenal could have used in a PSR heavy climate. Lastly, I think you look at the personnel. Arsenal agree, even if you don't agree that it's a big problem, Arsenal agree it's a big problem. They've changed their scouts. You're looking at Paulo Xavier, by the way, poached from Madrid. Talk about our gap in the South American market, but we've poached scouts recently because we believe the personnel weren't good enough. We've changed loan managers because we believe our loan performance hasn't been good enough. And then lastly, when you start to look at, okay, how many talents have actually left for development? And you're looking at names that would bring you significant value, and where are they going? You look at Ruel Walters, Rangers. That's a pretty serious club. You look at Mario Kozier-Dewberry, we're looking at Brighton, Newcastle, Ajax, and Dortmund were the teams that were interested. So we're not talking about a talent that people didn't believe in. And then Brian Okonkwo, probably rejoining Wrexham because of his brilliant experience, but he was League Two goalkeeper of the year. So I think he could have easily had bids from the championship for at least £5 million. And we're just consistently not getting value, and it's getting worse because when I look to the future, Mika Bireth, as I said, along with Charlie Patino, probably our last remaining real assets that we've built through the loan system are in the last year of their contract. So you're not going to get value no matter what. So on the problem, to actually answer your question after this huge monologue, I'd say I'm probably at a 7.5 to an 8 on it being a problem. There needs to be changes. But also, I think Arsenal have done those changes, and we do have to give them the scope to see where those changes lie. How have they done? What is Phil Cohen able to do? And there are some stuff that he's employed that I think I'd love to talk about in detail, but we've already strayed off so far from the topic, so I want to give it back to you guys.
Yeah, I think those are really, really excellent points. And I guess my main issue lies with the people who are saying this isn't a big deal. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think Kozier-Dewberry was going to break into the first team this coming season. Maybe, he could have played a couple minutes if we kept him, but I don't think that was a solution there. But my main problem lies with the side of the spectrum that says it's not a big deal, because we're in an era now where we're competing with clubs who, are kind of engaging in the multi-club format, right? And they have clubs that they own or sister clubs that they can just loan out their talent to, easy peasy, beautiful cover girl, right? And then you have clubs that are, like we'll talk about in a little bit, kind of trying to skirt through the PSR rules and use their academy players as a way to kind of get over that hump, get through those restrictions. You have teams that are attempting to essentially make a mockery of the Premier League's financial rules in terms of, how much money they can pump into their team through sponsorships, right? And we're surrounded by teams that are really trying to exploit every possible advantage that they can in order to win on the pitch. And so, like you said, when you see guys like Roel Walters and Mario Kozier-Dewberry walk out the door for free, right? And Charlie Patino too, those, to estimate it conservatively, that's 15 million pounds that you've probably left on the table, right? And that's not nothing. So, kind of in this era where you really need to maximize your efficiency in every single facet of the club, um, it's a little bit lax for me in terms of what we're currently doing. But like you said, I appreciate that the club is aware that there's a problem and they're working to fix it. And this is something that Edu has been doing since he first came into the club, right? Where he initiated a clear out of all our scouts, including Francis Kajigao, which I'm not sure I agree with, but they've been reworking the personnel. Like you said, I think Ben Napper moved to Norwich. So we brought in Phil Cohen. So yeah, we're making changes, and I'm optimistic about where those changes are going to lead. But for the time being, I just think um, we're just letting things kind of slip through the cracks when we really shouldn't be. But Sash, how do you feel about the Kozier-Dewberry departure, and do you think it's a big concern?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both of you absolutely smashed the nail on the head with everything you guys said. But I think this is also a bigger issue within the club itself, which goes beyond just the youth team. Like, even if you look at the first team, we don't maximize value for our players. And I feel like this has been the case for a long time. It's not something that I feel that has just happened overnight. Like George spoke about like the loan system right now, where in some talents we were not able to get them out. Maybe a few years ago under Ben Napper it was better, but still I don't think it was ever ideal. And especially now in this age of PSR and whatnot, like it's so important to make sure you're extracting value from wherever you can and maximizing gains. Because for now we're speaking about one player, but like Cozier Dewberry, as George has mentioned, there's so many other players as well. And when you aggregate all of these things, maybe you lose, I don't know, 20, 30 million in sales, which can be invested into the first team. And this is what Per Mertesacker has also spoken about, that the primary purpose of the academy is to serve the first team, whether that's by way of an academy player coming up and playing for the first team like Saka, or an academy player being sold. Like Joe Willock was sold for 25 million, phenomenal sale. We got Martin Odegaard by paying like 5 or 10 million more than what we sold Willock for, basically. So that has been reinvested into the first team effectively. So that's what the purpose of the academy is. When you keep letting some of these players go for nothing, that is a problem. And I think that's the thing that many people on social media are not able to differentiate. Like when I said that it's natural for Arsenal to lose good players because of where we are right now, it happens even at other big clubs. It happens at Man City. It happens at Chelsea. Barcelona lost talent. Cesc Fabregas back in the day. More recently, Hector Bellerin. So academies always lose talents. Like City lost Sancho, Cole Palmer. This happens. But yeah, we need to differentiate that from the value generation, right? And I think that's the area where Arsenal are lacking a bit. And it's good to see that the club has obviously recognized it and made the changes. But I'm curious to see how long it will take for us to actually see the results of those changes. So let's see what happens. But for now, yes, it's a big concern. And yeah, the key is the club have recognized it. So fingers
Do you
crossed
know?
they get.
You know what's part of the problem, guys? It's that Arsenal are doing so well that when you critique, you're not allowed to critique the club at this point, and we've almost had a shift, and that's part of the problem when you discuss this, right? Like, okay, the youth is a problem, sure, but it's not going to kill the club. It's not that there's no opportunity to improve, and it has nothing to say that it's a doomsday scenario. But
It's like a
at the
first
same
world
token,
issue, basically. It's like a first world
for
issue.
sure.
Like this wouldn't be under discussion 3 years ago when our first team didn't have a number 10. Like it's like not even
Mate,
part of
for example, for you, it's hot in Hanover. I'm sure you'd love some regular air conditioning. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
first world problem, it's not horrible, but at the same time, the fact that you don't have air conditioning is annoying, and it annoys you. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with this discussion with the youth, where it's like, no, there's clearly ways that Arsenal can maximize themselves, and we've shown ourselves to be a pioneer in so many aspects on the pitch that naturally that's the expectation that you want to hold them to off the pitch. And that's pretty much as far as it goes for me in terms of like critique and not critique. And, I hate to be rude, but sometimes when I talk with people that say it's not a problem completely, I go, well, Arsenal don't agree. Fundamentally, whether me and you agree or not is not true, but they've hired people recently as far back as 6 months to change every aspect of the youth academy, from recruitment, from loan management to scouts even. So I mean, there is an issue because they've uprooted the infrastructure of the academy. Once again, this is probably the biggest change that actually has happened in the academy since Per took over with Marcus Lucassen and his kind of removal of Steve Morrow and what they did about developing the Arsenal way, and kind of what you guys made reference to with the clearing of the youth scouts and kind of Lee Heron coming in from Reading and whatnot. This has been probably the biggest change since that point in 2018. So it's significant. And I think it's significant to people at least that have been around the youth or focus on the youth. And so, yeah, let's see what happens. But at the same token, you're not going to be there saying, I expect it to change in 8 months and 2 years. Like, I'd like change now, and I'd like us to do some stuff that we haven't done for years. I mean, the idea that Arsenal haven't had development centers or exploited a gap in the market, particularly in South America, which I'm sure we'll get into on Edu's role and kind of the club's role in that, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that for as long as you've been here, we haven't seen an attempt. It's not even a portfolio. Success can come and go, right, guys? Like, the whole thing is, if there's no consistent plan or sustainable process to us doing these things, then you're going to sit there and critique the man in charge of it. It's natural. So that's kind of where it comes from for me.
Especially for a club that says we don't buy stars, we make them, so let's make them in the most efficient
Let's
way.
make them. Let's make them.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of that joke that you and the guys at Different Knock make, where every time someone points out a little something, one of you guys kind of jumps in and says, "So what you're saying is you hate Arsenal, right?" And I really do think some people do that now, where
Yeah.
if you just point out this little thing that we could just be a little better at, someone comes in and says, "Oh, so you hate everything, huh?"
Yeah.
So I I hope that there's a mentality shift in that regard. But, you know, kind of moving on to the next thing and kind of in relation to this, what do you think is the best way to kind of extract value consistently from our youth players, right? Because um, I'm working on a video that we're going to put up on the YouTube channel at some point, and as part of the research, I was kind of looking back through our biggest sales, and number 7, number 8 ever were Joe Willock and Florin Balogun, right under Mikel Arteta, and both those guys, I think, really could be used as examples where we loaned them out, we gave them a little bit of first team experience, but mostly their value is kind of derived from establishing kind of a name for themselves in the academy, getting loaned out, having successful loan spells because we loaned them out intelligently, and then we are able to flip them for profit and keep moving, even when it was maybe uncomfortable, maybe when we didn't entirely want to sell them, we still, kind of pulled the trigger, took the money, and in hindsight, it was the right decision. So, um, yeah, just kind of with that in mind, do you think there is a better strategy that we could be employing in order to extract value from our academy talents?
100%. We have this really weird rule that if you're in the last year of your contract, we won't prioritize your loans. And that for me is a really stupid rule. I mean, it's what's held Mario Kozer-Dewberry back. And it's ironically, if you don't give somebody an opportunity, they're not going to re-sign and believe that you give opportunities. It's a double-edged sword. And I mean, you've put yourself in that situation by allowing them to be in the last year of their contract. We all know the rule that Richard Garlick said very famously for the first team in terms of saying, if you're going to approach the last 2 years of your contract, we're going to be making a decision whether or not we sign you or we get rid of you, in a sense. And we're going to move on from the period of losing talents on the last year of their contract or for free. Why isn't that with the youth? There's no excuse for that. Like, I think that's just common business practice, and it should be something that we employ regardless. So you look at Charlie Patino, for example, okay, has gone on a couple of loans at this point, hasn't really set the world alight. You need to make a decision last year, not this year, in terms of if you see a future for that type of talent. We're not talking about a talent that we don't know. We're not talking about a talent that we haven't prioritized. He's gone on loan. Why is he in the last year of his contract right now? And you've seen that same case with Mario Kozer-Dewberry. You just saw him put up a 14 goal and assist season and 17 starts. The kid's talented. It's not a question of talent. He's good. By the way, the people that are circling around for him, Dortmund, Ajax, Brighton, Newcastle, I don't know about you guys, pretty smart guys, pretty good with recruitment, good records. So it's not even a talent debate for me because we've got the talent examples. It's about being efficient and setting some pretty clear process. So like I would recommend in the last 2 years of your deal, you should be making decisions earlier. We should be maximizing our efficiency with those. And if you're going to go out on loan, right, and we should have far more recall clauses, in my opinion, which just means if the loan's not going well and you're not achieving a certain amount of appearances, put kind of a financial penalty or a recall clause in which you can bring them back in January to sort something better. And I think we do that. It's not that we don't do it, but it's definitely not a streamlined process. And it's definitely not something that I see done with enough regularity with our youth. And then I'd say kind of lastly on that topic, not just earlier decision making for loans, because I think loans can be hit or miss. But you look at Amari Hutchinson, for example, who we've just found out with Fabrizio Romano, they've got some serious negotiations with Ipswich, which was always likely going to happen. But, Chelsea are probably going to get a really nice injection of 15 million pounds minimum. I'd say 20, but I'm being even stupidly low just to appease anybody that believes I'm not trying to embellish here. But that should be our money. That should be Arsenal's money. Why is Chelsea getting that? And there was no reason, because Amari, Hutchinson, if anything, we could have used a backup right winger for Saka. This is not a case of the talent. He was clearly good enough. He excelled and got MVP with Ipswich and also the championship, really. So we're not talking about talent that wasn't Premier League ready. He was. In fact, Premier League is buying him now for £15 million. And this isn't the only example. So I think that if I was to make a rule and I was in charge, I would make that 2-year rule really quick. I would also make much better decision-making about planning for the first team. You look at what are some gaps in the first team. I think looking at Cheeto Obi, if you want to make that talent stay, you get rid of Keon Edwards and Amari Benjamin, who are strikers of the U21s, and you platform Cheeto Obi, even though he can't sign professional terms, which, by the way, is probably something worth talking about really quickly. Mm-hmm. These talents like Ethan Waneri and Cheeto Obi, why you're getting interest from foreign teams is because domestically, you're not allowed to sign talents to a professional deal until their 17th birthday. So there's a period when, if they're 15, 16, and they're playing at higher levels, foreign teams can offer them a professional deal, whereas Arsenal can't until they reach their 17th birthday. So there is a window in which Arsenal are bound by law, and as are every team, by the way. They're not allowed to offer professional terms. The lucrative financials are pretty big. But mate, I honestly don't agree that it's all about finances. I think if a talent sees you as the best place to develop their journey, they will stay. And, you look at Ethan Waneri, you look at why he felt part of the team. Okay, we paid him handsomely well, a record deal, by the way. So we gave him the financials, but also we actually gave him minutes and a debut and a plan at his age, which is pretty incredible. I see no reason why Cheeto Obi should be the starting striker for the U21s. Mate, he set a record that was broken, ironically, by the media. But he has set a record in the youth. We're not talking about a striker that is maybe, I don't know, just another name. And I really push back on this idea. Like, this is a guy that has the same talent level as a Miles Lewis-Skelly, as a Ethan Waneri. They're top talents. So platform them. Don't clog up the next age group where they're at. The Arsenal goalkeepers, by the way, they've released a large amount, and we've now recently bought a new goalkeeper youth. I don't pretend to know much, but this is an example of you unclogging the age groups to platform a talent that you can hopefully see, in addition to having better decisions on loans, earlier decisions on loans. And if you're not going to loan, either you're sold or you're sold with an idea to loan or an obligation to buy, something like that. But a decision should be made before they're in the last year of their contract. I think if you do those things along with the recall clauses and maybe financial penalties for not achieving certain appearances in a loan, those are just some like structural things that can guarantee you the best possibility of maximizing value. You'll still get people that'll fall through the cracks. You still won't get perfect situations. But I think those are really like objective ways that we can sit there and maximize our youth.
Yeah, and kind of contractually speaking on the recall clauses, it's really interesting that we don't do that consistently, right?
Yeah.
I don't practice in the UK. I don't claim to know any applicable UK laws here, but I'd imagine that unless you're dealing with an unreasonable loan club, it's not that hard to stick a little paragraph in there that basically says, if player does not achieve, let's call it 500 minutes by, December 31st of this calendar year, then Arsenal will have the right to recall the loan, right?
And it
And
means that they
so,
weren't serious, mate. Like, if they didn't do it, then they weren't serious about playing the youth that you wanted. And that's the whole point of the loan.
yeah. And that, if anything, that should, I don't understand why most loan clubs would go against that, because that incentivizes them to use that player that they came to you and entered into negotiations to loan from you, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't know why we're doing that. I do also think that, kind of in hindsight, Ben Napper maybe wasn't optimizing the loan destinations for some of our players. I mean, you just look at what happened to Charlie Patino over the course of the last year and change. Those loans haven't worked out for him. There's that one right back that we also had. I'm forgetting his name.
Waters?
Brooke
No,
Norton-Cuffy?
yeah, Norton Cuffy. Like
Oh, yeah.
I remember Norton Cuffy's loans also. At
Yeah,
least,
pretty poor at Coventry. He did pretty well at
yeah.
Millwall this past year, but yeah, no, he also was mismanaged.
Yeah. So, I mean, in addition to your points, I think maybe just getting better, and we'll see what the new guy does, but just getting better at choosing loans that really platform our players, that really allow them to play minutes in, big boy senior football, is something that we need to do as well. But Sash, is there anything that we missed here? Is there do you have any other ideas as to how we could most extract value from our academy talents?
So I think we need to categorize it into different situations, right? So I think one case is academy players who are so good, like Bukayo Saka, for example. And I think even Ethan Wanyeri is on that path where he's so good that he's just going to come straight into the first team and really establish himself as a top player. I see that happening with Ethan. So that's one category of players. And these are players you want to keep at the club at all costs. So the focus for these players must be to make sure they're extending their contracts, we're giving them what they want to aid in their progression. Then you have some players who might go on loans to other clubs and then come back, like how ESR went to Huddersfield and came back. Eddie obviously had a loan with Leeds, which didn't work out perfectly, but he also ended up coming back. There's always some players who can go on loan somewhere and then establish themselves, like even Bellerin. He went on loan to Watford and then established himself in the Arsenal first team. So this is one category of players. And I feel like these category of players are sellable at the right price. I know George is not happy that I put ESR in this category, but at least for the point, like it's like these players you should sell them, I think, if you get the right opportunity, right? Like for example, Maitland Niles also came under this category. We had a chance to sell him for 20 odd mil to Wolves and we didn't take it. So I think for some of these players you will have the opportunity to sell them. It's a case of taking it, and we did do it properly with Balogun, with Willock, and I think we will do it this time with Eddie. Like we've put a 50 million price tag on him. Maybe that's the new strategy of the day, like putting a really high price. Or I don't know. I don't know if they have like an Amazon like site where they put 50 million and hash it and put 50% discount to get it for 25, which is, yeah, it's, I don't know what we're trying to do there, but for these category of players, you should just sell them at the right price. And then there's another category of players who would go out on loan but not play for the first team. And it's for those players, I think, where we really need to improve. I think in our case, we've not even sent some of these guys on loan, or as you guys mentioned, we've sent them to the wrong places. But for this category of players, we really, really need to look into a proper strategy. And I think you guys made some amazing points. But the one thing I wanted to add was maybe we should look at partner clubs, clubs which, we have some sort of an agreement with, clubs that are conducive for youth development. I'm not saying Borussia Dortmund because obviously they're a really big club, but like Dortmund. So maybe there's a club that's coming up like the way RB Leipzig were coming up some years ago, that's developing youth, that plays in a certain way. I think that's what we really need to explore and see if we can have such a tie-up. And I know some people might think this sounds a bit shady. This is like what Chelsea used to do with Vitesse, for example. But I think Arsenal need to be a little bit clever here, like Chelsea. Yeah, I don't want us to emulate them, but they always do some of these sketchy things, but end up, getting these deals. Like George mentioned, they're going to get like 15 odd mil for Omari Hutchinson. That should have been our money. So I think we just need to be more streetwise, a bit more smart, do things that we usually wouldn't do. And yeah, I just hope the people that the club have put in place are able to do that, because like it can help us so much. Like it's
I don't even
crazy.
think it has to be shady, mate. Like, I mean, it's actually just good business practice. Like, part of the
Yeah,
use
yeah.
should be to scout good coaches that you believe emulate the style that you want to teach the boys, and develop relationships with clubs, because it's a two-way street. It's not just a benefit for your own use selfishly. I mean, it's a benefit for that
Yeah.
club if you're giving them a talent and a hole that they need in order to succeed for the season. So I think for as much as we say that, the youth development is huge, there's also career development that's involved here with coaches. You look at Dan Machichi, Kevin Betsy, who've moved on. We've made reference to Ben Aper, who got poached by Norwich to become their sporting director. In the same manner that we're developing youth, we're also developing coaches. And I think in terms of recognizing the loan market, you don't need to be a multi-club model, in my opinion, to be very successful. Of course, that's one way, and that's a different way that maybe we can debate. But I mean, at the same token, I don't see what's shady about identifying good practicing clubs like Derby, Reading, saying, okay, these are people with great youth records. How do we get our boys to get into their youth teams? How do we develop a relationship in which we're prioritizing clubs with smart, modern coaches? And we send them to smart, modern setups, and we see how they do. That's, for me, logic.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
even if you look at Chelsea, right? Sorry, Sham, but if you look at Chelsea, they have guys like Reece James, Mason Mount. I think they're great examples of guys who actually went to the championship, played for a couple of seasons, and then came back. So I think that's a very good point. And yeah, I didn't mean shady in terms of like it's not like some agent dealing, but maybe from the outside it looks a bit sketchy that certain players are only going to certain clubs. But I think that's what we need to also do. But as you mentioned, it's like common business practice, and that's what you really need. You just need to be more streetwise in how you do these things.
Yeah, I think I think it's just building relationships with other clubs, like George said. I mean, if you're a championship club or a League One club, and you knew that there was an opportunity to kind of be the first name on the list in terms of getting Arsenal's next superstar out of Hale End on loan, I think a lot of clubs would jump at the opportunity. It's it's honestly kind of why I was really excited. This might be a silly take, but this is kind of why I was excited about Okonkwo going to Wrexham, right? Because I think I outside of how Wrexham operates footballistically, that is a club with a lot of exposure, right? Media wise. So you're putting Okonkwo. I mean, I can pull up Hulu right now and I'm going to be watching Okonkwo. So,
Mhm.
I think that's a big deal and that's something to consider as well. So yeah, it's just about building relationships that can benefit you. Um, in terms of the Nketiah 50 million pound thing, that's just us trying to anchor the price. If we're actually demanding that money, that's just us trying to anchor the price so that when we do end up selling for what I would expect would be 35, 40 million, right? We've already influenced them from the outset to, bid higher or give us a higher price than they might have otherwise. So,
It's
I'll be
classic
very
negotiation.
surprised. I'll be very surprised if we get anything more than 25 for Eddie, to be honest.
Well, think about it though. Like if you started with that, right, and you started with saying, okay, give us 30 or 35 because we don't expect a lot. I think it
Mm.
sends a wrong message. I'm actually glad with the 50. Maybe this is a weird take. I'm glad with the 50. Are we getting 50? Hell no.
no,
But
probably not.
but you want to create, look, you want to create value, right? You never sell something that everybody knows you don't want. If I'm going to go to your house and you've got a car that you're not willing to sell, you're not going to give me a cheap deal on it. You're going to say, okay, give me 80, then maybe I'll listen. And you're like, okay, no problem. I'll have a look. I'll bid you 45, give you half of it. Okay. If you start at saying, okay, give me just 45 and we'll be done, then your first bid will be significantly lower. It'll be at 30, it'll be at 25. So I think part of the thing with Eddie, and I think even the part of the thing with Reece, I might add, is you build a fair market value. And then for me, you add at least 75% to that. And that's the demand that you ask for minimum. So if you believe Eddie is worth 30 or 35, and that's what you want to get as somebody that's selling, and add 70% to 75% of the value, and that's your ask. Because then you'll meet in the middle.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just that basic tenet of ask for more than you think you're going to get. And I mean I see it all the time
Yeah.
professionally where I'll be dealing with an artist who says I want $150,000 up front, and I want I want like four what's the word, like penthouse suites, and I
Mm.
want you to drive me everywhere, and I want 20% of the ticket sales, and I want this and I want that, right? And then you kind of have to talk them down from that, right? So as to actually just keep the negotiation going. So if we start out with 50 million instead of 35, right, then they're gonna have to talk us down from 50. And you can only really talk us down so much before you
Half
run
the
the risk of
value
us
is
just
still something you'd accept,
yeah.
right? But if you were half the value of 25 or 30, you're sitting there saying, no, that's bullshit. Like
Yeah.
that's not a lot.
And if you try to talk us down from 50 to 25, you run the risk of us just saying, okay, well, we're gonna
We'll
wait
keep them.
for someone else. So
Yeah.
yeah, you come back when you want to bid something more. But
I think the bright
yeah,
side in all of this is that everyone knows Eddie is available. Like I'm seeing on Talk Sports, Simon Jordan coming in saying it's disgrace that Arsenal are selling this guy for 50 million or giving this sort of an asking price. But I think that's good. At least it creates some attention and the whole world of football knows.
it's a disgrace when we try to sell Eddie and Nketiah for 50, but not a disgrace when Omari Kellyman gets sold for 20 million. We'll talk about that in a bit. But so one other question for me is that we're entering this new season. We've seen Ethan Winery play a little bit at this point. I don't think has Miles Lewis Skelly made
No.
no. Okay. I think he played like in a friendly or something for us, but nothing competitive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you expect from those two in terms of their involvement in the first team next season? Obviously, I guess Winery is more likely to be heavily involved than when Miles Lewis Skelly is, but in terms of minutes, in terms of maybe appearances, um, yeah, what are you expecting in terms of just how they're going to feature for the first team in the coming 2024-25 season?
I mean, I think when you first start out, you're looking at your first year of basically cup competitions with the odd sub appearances, and you're looking at maybe 200 to 300 minutes, roughly. You're talking about a debut season, let's say. Now, if you're not prepared to give them that, then send them out on loan. I don't see a purpose in this. They've clearly exceeded the U21 value. We're not talking about players that would benefit from another year being the U21s. So if you're not prepared to give them a minimum of 300 minutes, which is like roughly what we've used Fabio Vieira and Emile Smith-Rowe by, then send them on loan. I mean, that's kind of that would be a way of maximizing value, right? Like aid in their development. If you're not going to get the 200, 300 minutes with the first team, then get the 1,000 minutes with an adult team and speed up that process. I think both, by the way, they won't end up in their positions where they're both eights, absolutely, by the way, but they won't start out at that. I think Ethan will begin to be started out in the wing as he gets adjusted to the physicality. But also, guys, I have to say, having watched them, my personal opinion is these both boys are physically there. They're not going to have much to learn physically about adapting. If anything, they're just going to have to adapt in terms of the positional intelligence and understanding triggers in terms of the press, in terms about where we want our players to be in replacing zones. If you go outside of one and going into another, those things, the game is just a little bit quicker. Not just a little bit, it's actually much quicker when you go from academy football to the first team. And so it's less about actually the physical strength that people assume. It's more about the speed of thought and the mental adjustment to a first team environment, especially for talents that are physically able-bodied. I mean, Miles Lewis Skelly, if you wanted to ask, his closest comparison is Moussa Dembele. And that's for a reason. It's because he's known to ride challenges and he's been able to hold off challenges. Yeah, and that is something that he's done, by the way, against adults in the Checker Trade Trophy. So, like, we've seen it. Ethan Winery is another one who's physically far beyond his years. And like, mate, even in the few appearances that he's had, I'm sorry, I think anybody with an eye can see that boy's talented. And you just have to look at how often Martin Odegaard would look to find him in first team minutes. That wasn't just because it's like, oh, I like Ethan. No, it's because I trust you and I trust your technique. So, yeah, for me, I'll just be very insistent on Arsenal being very clear with those two's development. If you're not prepared to give them the 200 to 300 minutes that they, by the way, deserve at this current moment, then send them on loan to a team that'll give them 1,000 minutes. By the way, to a league that we can actually learn something. So I'm thinking the Championship. I'm thinking Premier League if they would, although I think that would be tough because Miles and Ethan are only 17. So it would be tough to demand that the Premier League clubs would be willing to spend that without having seen them. So I think a championship would be a really brilliant idea. And look, if they can get a loan in Germany or to a top 5 league in terms of, in Holland, then no problem. That could also help. But get 1,000 minutes if you're going on loan as a minimum. And then if you're staying with Arsenal, 200 to 300 minutes should be the idea.
Yeah, I wonder if we might see a little bit of both, honestly, where maybe in the first half of the season when things are still building up, when we're still competing in domestic cups,
Yeah.
we might feature them a little bit more. And then, in the back half of the season when we're hitting the run in, when we're hitting hopefully Champions League knockout stages, we loan them out to, like you said, maybe a championship club, maybe, a big 5 league, and just kind of get them that experience and get them more of those minutes when we definitely can't offer them at that point. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think you're absolutely right about where we're going to start out Winery, because I think the last few times we've seen him, he has been on the wing. So I kind of wonder if he might be an option in terms of Saka rotation in the
He
first
should
half of the
be.
season. Yeah.
He should be,
So
yeah, because as he learns a lot of the pressing triggers, it's actually easier sorry, just to butt in, like from a coaching perspective, going in the middle of the park is huge responsibility, and it's the easiest point in which a team can be breached. So typically you actually integrate youth on the wings. I mean, Arsene Wenger did this so well with a lot of our attacking midfield talents, Aaron Ramsey, your boy Sash, and amongst others, when he introduced him at right wing, it's because you are able to learn, and say you make a mistake, it's farther from your goal. So regardless, if you're making a mistake on the wing, the distance to goal is a little bit bigger, and it's easier to adjust for a team that's accommodating a youth star. I will also end on Miles Lewis-Kelly. Don't be surprised if he's an option as an inverted left back in integration into the first team, because he carried that role at international level, and it's also something that would be brilliant for him, learning the role and not anchoring, because he is that Moussa Dembele 6'8" type, and that's a big role. That's a big responsibility in a team. So in order to really bridge yourself when you're already 17, I wouldn't be surprised if I was to see him kind of integrate more as a fullback or an inverted fullback coming inside, as opposed to remaining in the block and turning in the block.
yeah, that'll be really interesting to see, actually, with Lewis-Kelly playing the inverted left back. And honestly, the pieces could fall into place. Zinchenko has been linked with a move away. It sounds like we're very open to getting rid of him. So we'll see what happens there. But Sash, what are your thoughts on what we should do with Winery and Lewis-Kelly for the coming season?
I think we will take a look at them in preseason. So I know that the club is planning to integrate Ethan in during the preseason, see how it goes, and then they will take a call. So I'm quite interested to see how that plays out, because even a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, I don't know if you guys remember, just after the World Cup, we played those friendlies, and I think we played, one of them was against Juventus. It was
And Leon.
insane. It was insane. Yeah, it was insane how at 16, these guys, they just look like they belonged at that level, And for me, that's insane, because I've not seen that with a lot of players. At that age, the fact that they're just able to come and physically compete, as George mentioned, physically, Lewis-Kelly is ready, and I think Ethan also is. He's so unique. The way he protects the ball and the tight spaces is unbelievably good. And I just think this is a superstar player. Every now and then in football, you'll have a player who's playing at even 17, 18. And I feel like Ethan is one of those players. I've tried not to hype it up too much, because obviously he's a kid and whatnot. But I just think this guy is really destined for something crazy. And yeah, Cozy Dewberry is also an amazing player. As we've discussed, it's a shame that we're losing him, but yeah, it's the reality of, I guess, football. But no, I'm interested to see if we end up integrating these guys even for the Premier League. If they're still at Arsenal and not loaned out, I can definitely see them playing in the Carabao Cup. I think we need to use that competition to give,
because there's a new
players.
seeding thing, the Carabao Cup, I believe, if I'm correct, by the way, which encourages pretty much a proper you're not going to get maybe the West Hams and the Brighton draws we've had in earlier rounds. I think that, with these new seeding competitive rules, you're going to get a build up to facing respectfully worse teams first as we get up. So there should be opportunity in those domestic cups.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should do what Arsene Wenger did, 2007. He played the youth throughout the Carabao Cup, even the final. I think a 17-year-old Walcott scored. So I want to see those vibes in the Carabao Cup. Just let the youth shine and give them the chance. But I'm more curious to ask you guys this question. Let's assume that Ethan is integrated and Mikel's like, no, you're going to play in midfield. I think the club will then have a decision to make whether to keep Emil Smith Rowe or Fabio Vieira. I already feel like it's inevitable that one of them leaves. So I'd like to ask both you guys which one stays and which one goes, if it were up to you.
Yeah, I think it's an easy question if you're talking about Ethan specifically, because Ethan's more of a Martin Odegaard type. So I think Fabio Vieira would be a lot more worried than an Emil Smith Rowe would be, because you're looking at Ethan in terms of his profile. I've done this comparison before, and I don't do it to hype him up, but he really reminds me of Modric, like an early Modric, somebody that is, I wouldn't quite say is the absolute output machine, but he's somebody that can dictate play and is really an offensive 8, but drives the tempo of a team. He would really thrive in the Martin Odegaard role. And I think Fabio Vieira is really quite similar. He's got brilliant output. He's probably got one of the better half space crossing in the team, but Ethan is more of that type, more of that passer. He can carry, but he is more of that type of player, whereas Emil Smith Rowe is still somebody that would represent a unique profile in the squad. Like Ethan wouldn't replicate what Emil can do. Emil's much more of a second striker, a burst from midfield, carrying in tight spaces, that type of player. So between the two, I think I would look at Fabio Vieira to look over his shoulder in the next 18 months. And if he's not able to establish himself, I think Ethan could ask a question. But yeah, I think Emil has a little bit more leeway just because his profile is different and because he can operate in different zones as well.
Yeah, I think personally it's going to come down to which player the club can get more money for. So I think that might be what it could come down to, because I see Smith Rowe getting maybe 40 million plus from clubs within the league. There's reported interest from Fulham now. We know Aston Villa have always been there. So I'm just intrigued to see how the club approaches this, because I agree with what you said. If you just look at purely football style, it makes sense to have that ESR profile in the squad, because Fabio Vieira, I guess, is more closer to what Ethan does, and Ethan can probably play in that role. But Sham, do you see it the same way, or would you do something different?
I mean, to be quite honest, I'm not sure either Vieira or Smith Rowe have much of a long-term future at Arsenal. Vieira, I like Vieira's talent. I've never been overly convinced by his how do I put this? By his physical levels. I've never been one of those people who thinks he needs to bulk up or anything. I think it's just more of a personal preference. I always prefer the more physically robust players. And in terms of Smith Rowe, I just think he does have a profile that is more difficult to replicate, that is very unique within the squad. But I just think we're hitting a point where Arteta has gotten out in front of the camera multiple times now and said, I love Smith Rowe. I want to play Smith Rowe. And then we haven't seen it happen. Right. And so regardless of whether that's the case, I think we're just kind of hitting a point where you play him or you sell him, right? Because we're kind of wasting resources here. But if it came down to just picking one in order to integrate Winery, then I'd probably say goodbye to Fabio Vieira.
That's a tough one. I think it's a really tough one. But yeah, let's see what happens. I think it really depends on the demand for these guys also. How much do you guys think Vieira goes for? Because that's my only sort of concern here.
I mean, we've not got value for him, right? So, I mean, if he was to leave now, it would be under £20 million. I mean, again, you'd have to loan him, in my opinion. ask him to play, and then he would get the value that you paid for him. But right now, you're losing money, no matter how you slice it, for both of them because they haven't played, and we've destroyed their value. I mean, it's actually quite amazing that we've got values of 40 million for a meal with 200 or 300 minutes. It actually should speak to the talent, I might add. But I think from a Vieira perspective, you've got to build that up again.
Yep. And Sham, what do you think?
I think we'd be lucky to get 20 for Fabio Vieira at this point, just because, like George said, we've really destroyed the value. And even when he's been back from injury this season, I think there were instances in which we could have played him. Right, Vieira is a very versatile player at the end of the day. So there's more places to make use of him and integrate him in the lineup, and we just haven't seen it happen. I mean, there have been a couple cameos on the right wing that look pretty good. But yeah, other than that, I don't think he's become as big a part of the team as we really expected him to at this point. So yeah, I don't know where the interest would come from. I think there was a link for him to return to Porto recently, but other than that, I don't really think. I don't think there's that much interest in him.
Yeah, let's see what happens. It's going to be a very interesting transfer window because nobody can really predict who's going to leave. Like, it's pretty interesting to see who still stays come like the end of August. So on that note, I want to get to the next topic, which is youth players again, and Arteta's supposed lack of trust in youth players. And at least that's what people on social media seem to believe, that Arteta doesn't trust youth. And they attribute Martinelli, Saka, and all of these guys to Emery playing them and giving them the chance as opposed to Arteta. So, George, I want to ask you, is that a concern for you that there have not really been cases of youth players who made their debuts under Arteta and then like established themselves? Or do you think that he's already developed a lot of guys who maybe made their debuts under other coaches?
I mean, the debut point is a very valid point. I think if you factually look at it between Klopp and Pep, if you go back, since they both have been in the league, by the way, and both, I would argue, have had periods of challenging. I think Klopp has had something like one debut every 56 days since he's been in charge. And I think Pep has something like one every 113 days, whereas Mikel has one in 150 days. So that's a clear double. In fact, in some cases, triple the amount of time it takes for debut. So there's no doubt that he can do better at that. But at the same token, I mean, Mikel Arteta has made a name for himself being a very young manager with a very young squad. So this idea that he can't develop youth is a fallacy. Like, that's not true. But he is somebody that doesn't choose seniority. And that is true. So that is something that he needs to fix. Because he's shown the talent. He's shown the talent in countless examples of him developing talent. In fact, look at Eddie Nketiah. I mean, if you really want to get technical, when Eddie came into the team to what he is now, that wasn't a 50 million pound asset. Even we won't get that, but the work he's done with Eddie Nketiah is brilliant. The work he's done with Bukayo Saka is brilliant. Martinelli, the work he's done with our young squad is brilliant. He improves players. He's a top coach. No one debates that. I think his trust of youth and his squad management in general has always been a point of concern that probably should be addressed a little bit more. So yeah, improve your debut rate for sure, but also not just that, like, be more willing to trust your squad. So that could be maybe an overarching point.
Yeah, I remember that we were both of us were a little bit annoyed. Like, I think there was some irrelevant Champions League games at the end because we already qualified, and we were hoping that he would give like Nwaneri a chance to play in the Champions League, but he just brought players within the squad on. And there's one point of view to say that, look, he respects protocol a lot. He wants to make sure the hierarchies within the squad are respected. But sometimes I think, that's a bit boring, Mikel. Come on, man. The fans want to see the youth play. Like, give them a chance. So
yeah,
I think there has to be a balance that needs to be found. I think even Sham was pro giving youth chances at the time. Has your mind changed since Sham, or do you still see it in a similar way?
I mean, so you're talking about the 6-0 against Lens, and the way I saw that was, I was kind of split, right? Because on the one hand, yeah, sure, you could sub on Ben White and Gabriel Jesus, but that's so boring, dude. Like we already beat them. On the other hand, players are coming to Arsenal so that they can play in the Champions League, right? So, even though that is a great opportunity to put on guys like Wineri and Lewis Skelly and whatever academy kid was on the bench that day, it's not the best look to basically tell your senior players that you're going to lose out on Champions League minutes to kids. However, on the balance of it, you're beating Lon 6-0. So I feel like that would have been more forgiven. But generally speaking, yeah. I mean, like George said, Klopp and Guardiola give debuts 3 times as frequently as Arteta does, which I think is something that he has to work towards improving on. And I just think there have been situations where we could play kids where, we're winning comfortably or, the game's out of hand and there's no need to throw on players who, have played 3,800, 4,000 minutes this season. Um, so yeah, I think overall Arteta could do a much better job of just showing first team players that the bench is not your ceiling in terms of your involvement with the first team, right? I do think he's done a good job of involving academy players in first team training. I think we've included a lot of the Hale End players in that regard, but yeah, I just think there have been several moments where we're up 3-0, we're up 5-1 or whatever, and then we look to the bench and it's a guy in the starting 11 coming on instead of someone who maybe would enjoy that moment a little bit more, maybe would take something more from it. So I'm kind of in the middle. I see both sides of it, but I do think generally speaking that is something that Arteta has to improve in.
I still think this is like a first world problem, as we discussed. It's more like he's doing so many things right. Like he's beaten Lens 6-0, but if there's something that maybe he could fix or do even better, it's probably this. And I'm interested to see how he will evolve as a coach, actually, because this is not Mikel's final version. Like this is his first job. He's still a young coach. This was his first season in the Champions League. So I'm quite intrigued to see how he evolves. But I know, George, you need to leave very soon. So I just want to ask one last question to you. I'm going to
Mhm.
club a couple of questions and actually ask to you. So
Yeah.
it was on the South American market, actually, that we had discussed before. So we obviously have a technical director from South America. And I think a lot of us were expecting more than just Marquinhos from South America when it comes to buying young players that we develop. And it seems that we have missed out on a few opportunities. Like you've seen Estavio going to Chelsea recently. Real Madrid obviously signed Endrick, but obviously he's like an insane talent. But like this, there are a lot of talents in that region, and we somehow don't seem to really bring anyone of note. Like the 2 players we signed from Brazil are Marquinhos and Pablo Mari, and that's for me not good enough for a team that has supposed expertise in that region. So my questions to you are: number one, what should we do? Like, why is it that we're not getting players from South America? And my second question to you is that we speak a lot, we've spoken throughout this podcast about like changes that have to be made to the youth system. It could also include like the South American market. I think you mentioned that we got scouts or people dedicated towards that region now. My question is, how long do you think it would take for those changes to actually be seen? And how long should we give as fans?
I mean, Paulo Xavier is kind of the scout that we poached from Madrid, and he is actually responsible for bringing Vinicius Jr. to Madrid. So that's like the prestige about what we've done. How long should we have waited? I mean, we've waited long enough. Personally, I mean, it's been something that I've critiqued, from Edu. I mean, this idea that one of the big selling points of recruiting him and his job from Corinthians was the fact that he had an expertise in the region. And you know what? It's not even just a South American, but we haven't shown an expertise or a gap in youth recruitment anywhere. Like if okay, you would assume it would be Brazilian and South American because that is what Edu is, right? But what if he started reaching areas of South London, areas, within Crystal Palace or in Ireland. Phil Cohen now is somebody else that he's recruited, and we had a gap elsewhere. I think fans could be more comfortable with it, but he hasn't done the business there, and that's where he needs to improve. I don't know how long you can give. I mean, I think for me, it's frustrating because you've done well now to recruit a really top level scout, but I mean, I can't understand why you'd have to wait 2 years to see the fruits of that labor. I mean, maybe you have too much business to do this summer, but I mean, as far as next January, as far as next summer goes, in the next 12 months, you should expect to see the fruit of recruiting a top level scout. And that's kind of the minimum that I would ask for, to be honest with you. I don't think, that it's a lost cause, but you've already approached the point of no return, haven't you? I mean, he's been here since 2018 and you haven't seen any use of that expertise. So you're frustrated. And then when you start to look at that scout recruitment of Paulo Xavier, start to ask yourself, okay, like we've recruited a really top level name that has done the business for Real Madrid, one of the best clubs in the world. I'd like to see that. And to be fair, Phil Cohen has started a youth development center in Ireland. So they're making moves, like the new hires are starting. But again, I would say within the next 12 months, you'd be very much at Edu's door and Paulo Xavier's door saying, listen, if it's not going to be the South American market, create a gap elsewhere, find a gap elsewhere.
No, absolutely. I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there. I think we need to start seeing change soon, as it's already been quite some time. And people wrongly attribute Martinelli to Edu when it was actually Francis Cagijao who identified and also signed Martinelli for Arsenal. And he was a scout that actually was sacked by Edu. So for me, that one aspect is a bit disappointing when it comes to Edu's time at Arsenal. And yeah, that's what we love about George as well. Like, he is not someone that simply sticks up for the club every time. He's always been someone who's been on board the Arteta train throughout, but he's also criticized where criticism is due. And that's why I love him so much. So yeah, thanks for coming on, George. I think if you need to leave, Sham and I will continue with a couple of remaining questions. But yeah, it was really great to have you on today. And like, thank you so much again for your time and for coming on the pod. And to our listeners, you can find him on Twitter at GeorgeV_AFC. You can also find him speaking on the Different Knock podcast. So that's an amazing podcast as well. And yeah, we all love listening to George. He's always so well articulated and has some amazing insights. He always has unique insights as well, which is very inspiring for me. And yeah, big fan.
Thank you, mate. You're making me blush. Too humble. But thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
The Patreon is worth the money. So
thanks, guys. No, I love coming on. Hopefully we can do this another time as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, guys. All right, have a good one.
Thank you. You too. So, Mr. Sham, so I'm going to come to you now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So we were on the topic of the South American market. We were speaking about how long it would take for like these changes to be reflected. How long should it take, rather? And obviously, Arsenal have a huge budget now dedicated towards just acquiring youth. This has been widely reported now. But then we also live in an age where there's clubs like Aston Villa, Everton, and Chelsea seemingly doing some sketchy stuff. Obviously, the Premier League has written to the clubs now to remind them, according to Sam Wallace, that they're going to be like penalized for doing stuff like this, the sort of shady dealings that I was on about. So, Sham, my question to you is this. Considering that we do have a significant youth budget, and considering that these collusions are not going to work anymore based on what the Premier League has written, how long do you think it should take for us to get better in South America? And do you see that as a point of concern? Because a lot of talent is there.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like George said, we brought on Paulo Xavier from Real Madrid. I'm pretty sure that's the guy who found Vinicius Jr., right? So really talented guy, good track record. You mentioned Francis Cagigao, right? He not only discovered Martinelli, I'm pretty sure he's the guy who scouted Saliba. He found Fabregas among other players, right? Cagigao has a ridiculous track record in terms of just the top notch players that he's helped bring to Arsenal.
Saliba as well, apparently.
Yeah, he was the guy who brought in Saliba, or at least scouted him so we could bring him in. And you have Edu, who's extremely connected within Brazilian football and the Brazilian national team setup. So you would expect at this point in time that there would have been some fruits coming out of that. And people point at Marquinhos as kind of a death knell for how that has gone so far. Um, Obviously, not a really convincing talent. We'll be lucky to get back what we paid for him in terms of selling him. But I also think it's important to consider what Chelsea are doing in that market, right? They just paid, I think it was like almost, I think it was at least 45 million, maybe approaching 65 million euros for Estevao. That's crazy money for a really unproven teenage player from Brazil, right? We signed Martinelli for peanuts. We signed Marquinhos for peanuts. Obviously, one of those two worked out, but it's and I think Kendry Paez they also signed for a really big sum. Chelsea are just going around in Argentina and Brazil and just splashing pretty hefty sums of money wherever they see a good player.
It's not
And
a bad strategy, actually.
it works for them, but the problem is like we can't sell ourselves hotels. We don't have as reckless and aggressive a spending strategy as Todd Bowley does. So, if we get quoted 45 million euros for a 16-year-old, we're going to turn around and walk away. And I still think rightly so. So, it's just about it's really tricky because you basically have to beat teams like that to talent and get to them first and convince them that either you're going to put them into the first team or you're going to put them on a track to be a successful senior top flight player, right?
Which
And
is
so
insane to me because how the hell are Chelsea able to convince these guys? Like, have you seen their starting 11 and like how are they able to even convince someone like an Omari Hutchinson that this is a great place for you? Like, I never understood that.
I think what Chelsea are doing is basically, throwing big amounts of money at players and then, signing them and shipping them out on loan. And if I had to guess what the plan is, they're just going to rinse and repeat over and over and over, and then either decide whether they're going to integrate those players into the first team or sell them for profit. Um, Although Estevao, that's so much money that we'll see if they get profit on it. That strikes me as more someone that they have their eye on for future first team position. So I'm not sure how you compete with that, but also I think Edu should be someone who has the strings to do that. So we'll see what happens. I do agree with George that the changes that we've made, the effects of those should be pretty apparent relatively soon, right? I think he said within 12 months, which I think makes sense. So we'll see what happens. I'm disappointed. I'm a little annoyed with Edu, but also I'm willing to give him some grace just because of what Chelsea and obviously Real Madrid as well are kind of doing in that arena.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And also, yeah, also cutting him some slack. Historically, we have not operated that way, just poaching. Like Martinelli I think, was like an exception. But historically, we don't operate that way. But Real Madrid and Chelsea have done so. So, yeah, as Mourinho mentioned the word football heritage, I think Arsenal need to build a bit of that when it comes to the South American market. But let's see. Let's see how it goes. We obviously have a very good South American contingent at the club. Like we've signed guys like Gabriel Magalhaes, Gabriel Jesus, players like this who are already established, even David Luiz before. But yeah, just a case of can you get a few of these gems because Brazil does produce one of these types of players every now and then. And if you ask me, if there's one thing that Arsenal I would like to see them have is like a world beater. Like I would like to see a potential Ballon d'Or level player playing for Arsenal, and sometimes it tends to be from one of these countries like Brazil or Argentina, where this kid who's balling at 16. So let's see.
Yeah, and then on the on the matter of these interesting transfers that the likes of Chelsea and Aston Villa are up to. Um, it's so funny because I've commented on them and I had so many Aston Villa fans jump into my mentions and kind of try to argue that it's like, oh, that's 19 million is what Chelsea wanted to pay for him. That's what he's worth. He's very highly rated, right? Which I think is hilarious. I'll put it to you like this: it's very difficult to prove this, either in arbitration or a court of law or whatever. But it's difficult to prove that this is a fraudulent transaction, but also everyone kind of knows that it is, right? Like no one knew who this kid was before he
Yeah.
got so. Well, obviously, people in the youth circuit probably knew who he was, but 19 million is a crazy sum for a guy who played, I want to say like 70 something minutes or maybe like 100 something minutes of senior football for Aston Villa. He got loaned to Derby, didn't play for them. Very, very inexperienced player. That's not worth 19 million. So I think what's happening is you have these teams who are bumping up against the PSR wall. And also, these are teams that are supportive of Manchester City's suit against the Premier League, right? Chelsea, Aston Villa, Everton, Newcastle, right? They're all in line behind City because they want that to be the status quo, as it will help them just spend crazy money and avoid any penalty for overspending or living outside of their means or stuff like that. So I think what's happening here is, it's a bit of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Villa signed Matson from Chelsea, and then kind of maybe as part of that transaction
It's like
said to
the
them,
Arthur Pjanic deals,
yeah,
70 plus million, insane.
yeah, and I wouldn't be shocked to hear that Aston Villa needed to make that exact amount of money in profit so that they could avoid PSR for that year. So it's yes, you could argue that like it was a valid agreement, but at the same time, like it is collusion. It's not fair market value. I've seen people try to say that us loaning Raya for a season before signing him permanently, like is a loophole akin to this, but that's just standard practice. That's us saying,
Loan.
hey,
Yeah.
hmm? Yeah,
It's
that's
like
us
a
saying,
loan.
can we take this player on, right? Not permanently, but just on loan. We'll pay his wages for the season, but we can't give you this 30 million pounds until next year. We want to give you the 30 million pounds, and we're basically agreeing to do that, but we can't do it right now, or else we're going to get docked points. That's
The people
fine.
are acting like we've coerced Brentford into accepting it. Like Brentford have literally accepted it. They're like, okay,
Brentford could have told us to go to hell, and we would have had no recourse.
yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah, I just think it's a lot of bad faith, and clearly there's something wrong if the Premier League is just like, hey, we're not a big fan of what you're doing here. So we'll see what happens. I do think the Premier League is going to crack down on it. I think, and I've said this before, I think the Premier League is really hitting a point where they've realized that they've kind of opened Pandora's box here, and they're trying to shut it while they still can. So, and now it's not just City, right? Now you have Chelsea and Newcastle and Villa and Everton really challenging their authority in this regard. So
Just
that's
relegate them all.
yeah, yeah, just dock all of them points. It'll make our lives easier. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, crazy stuff. I never thought we'd see a day like this.
No, no, not at all. But I think it was only a matter of time. The moment the Premier League starts enforcing rules, teams are going to try to find ways around it. But I'm interested to see what the punishments would be. Like, I'm really looking forward to that. Like, I could never support a club like that. One, for moral reasons, but also two, it's like, can you imagine supporting a team where like, oh shit, are we going to be docked points sometime soon because of what we did? We're always living with that stress. But at least with Arsenal, I know that we're like, for whatever flaws we may have, sometimes we might lack streetwiseness, but at least we're very fair in how we do our dealings, and I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I've always respected about us is the fact that we don't do this kind of under the table kind of thing, right? If we know that we can't do a deal for because it would break financial rules or because it would put us in the red or something, we just don't do the deal. We don't, unless we can wheel and deal really quickly with our players for fair market value and kind of scrounge up some cash that way. But if it's not above board, we don't do it generally. Um, Outside the Super League, but also
Mhm.
I think we kind of
Yeah,
had to.
we apologized enough for that.
We apologized. The other members of the Big Five and Spurs did it, so I think we would have been at a disadvantage to say no. It didn't happen anyway. But yeah, I think generally speaking, we've really operated in a very honorable fashion, and so I can't help but respect that
Yeah, and long may that continue.
for sure, for sure. Well, we've been going for about an hour 20 at this point. You got anything else that you want to touch on, or should we call it for today?
I think I'm done with my list of questions. I could speak for another hour and 20 minutes, but I think the listeners will be cursing us at this point.
That's true. That's true. Well, we'll put a bow on it then. And again, we want to thank George for joining us. You can follow him at GeorgeV_AFC. Like Sash mentioned, he's on the Different Knock. He's on the Canon podcast. They do really, really great work. Great pod, great scouting videos. Really do check them out. And so we got about a little over 2,400 people watching. I expect a little over 2,400 new followers for George. I also expect 2,400 new followers for Sash. You can follow at LT Arsenal on Twitter. You can also follow the pod at This Week Arsenal. You can check us out on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube right now, please do like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. We really do appreciate all that. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do leave us a 5-star review and just say some nice things about us when you do. It really does help out in terms of getting us to a wider audience. Then you can follow me at Shamsdale, and I don't expect 2,400 new followers in that regard. But thank you so much for being here with us and for listening to us ramble on about about Hale End and about Aston Villa being sneaky sneaks. And yeah, we really do love it. So we will be back on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. UK time with another illustrious guest that will be revealed at the start of next week. Until then, take care. Be a gooner, not a goon, and we will talk to you soon. Until then, bye-bye.
Maybe we'll have a good surprise for you.